Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Crouch, and some of you will know me. I'm a parishioner here at St. John's. I am also a member of the St. John's Vestry. And if you know anything about church vestries, you know that one task, responsibility a vestry has is to monitor the financial health of a church, but also, I think, to bring awareness of our own financial health, and maybe even how being aware of, tending to our financial health, our financial journey through life can be a spiritual practice. And I'm pretty sure that my fellow parishioner and our fellow parishioner, Lisa Kirchenbauer, who is presenting today's webinar, feels the same way. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Carolyn. It's so wonderful to be here with you and with everyone else who has joined us this morning.
Lisa is the chair of St. John's Planned Giving Committee. And if you didn't know we had a Planned Giving Committee, we're really glad you're here this morning. She also is part of a group of St. John's called the 1816 Society, which I bet she'll talk about later on. Lisa, you and I was thinking about it today. We go back quite a long way. As happens in churches, we've been sitting across the aisle from each other like the whole time our children have been growing up, and both of all our kids now are college age. So that's a long time. And in that time, I've also sort of had a bit of a distant seat, but to really see your career and your professional identity as a financial planner grow and evolve. And if folks don't know this, you're a leader in the field in the Metro DC area. We are so blessed to have you as part of the St. John's community. Tell us a little bit how you got into this field of work.
Well, actually, I have been in some form of financial services now since I graduated from college. So I'm going to date myself at 36 years. I really was fascinated by it, sort of fell into it a little bit, but then learned about financial planning. And I love the idea of working with people and helping them think about their money and take control of their money. And it's evolved from there to the work that we do now is so much more holistic. It's really about an integration, and I'll talk about this at the end, of values, vision, and wealth together. And I think that's part of what we're going to be talking about today around planned giving. And so I've had my firm for over 21 years now. And so that idea of being intentional and thinking about legacy is really important. And we try to bring that to the work we do with clients, but I also try to bring that to my work here with St. John's and planned giving.
So would you like me, I'm the operator of the slide deck. So shall I stop the slide deck share for now, and you want to just sort of talk a little bit?
I want to tell a story. Yep, thank you. So I want to tell a story I think that will help set the stage for the importance of planned giving, especially in the life of the St. John's Church. And then we'll resume some of the technical conversation about what is planned giving and how can you do it. And as you alluded to, what is the 1816 Society, which I think is really important to share with people. So I want to tell you a story about Elsie Quinby. And some of you may know that name from somewhere, Quinby. Where did it come from? Well, Elsie Quinby was born right around the turn of the 20th century. She was born in Baltimore. And when she got to be about 18 years old, she moved to Washington, D.C. And that's where the story really begins and the connection to St. John's. Turns out that Miss Quinby, she never married, so this is important too, was the chairman of the decorating committee at St. John's when the church acquired the parish house shortly after World War II. So how many people knew that? And then during the war, she was a Red Cross volunteer, and she served as I hope I'll say this right, Adjutant General of the American Women's Voluntary Services Motor Corps. Very interesting. She ended up serving on the board of the St. John's Orphanage, which some people who've been around the church for a long time may remember. She was a member of the Junior League, the Washington Junior League, the Soulgrave Club, which is a women's club, and the 1925 F Street Club, whatever that is. Yes,
That no longer exists, but the Soulgrave Club still exists.
it still
And the
exists.
orphanage morphed into an organization that our parish still has a connection with, St. John's Community Services.
Exactly. And so, interestingly, on July 4th, 1988, unfortunately, she died. She had no immediate survivors. There were no immediate family members. And with her death, she left a very significant legacy, which doubled the size of our endowment at that point in 1988. And today, thanks to good stewardship and good investment of these funds, it has made a significant difference in the life of our church, both on an annual basis, as far as providing some income to support the operations. It has helped us renovate the parish house, renovate the church. And it's thanks to her legacy, along with people like Dick Ellison and Ben Hutto, who thought about St. John's in their estate planning. And that's really what plan giving is about. So I thought I'd share that story first. And now I'd like to dive into the slides if we could.
Great. And I mean, anyone who's watching this presentation who's been on or is on the vestry, I'm on my second term on the vestry. The first one I was on, I think, was when we were renovating the sanctuary.
Right.
And this line item in the budget or in our financial report, Quimby Fund, as you said, it has been vital to what we do at the church.
It was sort of fun to find out a little history. It took me a little bit of Googling, but found it. So I thought it was really important to share. All right, let's go to my first slide after this title slide, if we could.
Here we go.
Great. So let's talk about what plan giving is. So plan giving is really the idea of deciding within either your estate planning documents, and we'll talk about which estate planning documents, or through making beneficiary designations to St. John's or to other charities that you care about. It's planning ahead for what you want to do with your resources when you leave the planet. Now, why is it important? Well, it's important because without these kinds of gifts and having this endowment to support the needs of our church, our community, the mission that we have within Washington, D.C., even the diocese, all of those things wouldn't be possible. Being able to have this nest egg, this safety net that we have is critically important. And I know, having been involved with the diocese and the financial resources committee, that there are many churches that are not as fortunate as we are. And
That's
yet
right.
it's right. And it's important, though, that we sustain this and we continue to build it. And of course, we have good financial management and investment management over it. It helps sustain the mission of our church and support the running of the church on an ongoing basis. So
critical. And like you said, because we are so blessed with just exceptionally talented and knowledgeable parishioners who can serve as treasurer and financial advisor in our congregation. And it's enabled us to really enjoy, and I think you'll agree with this, long-term financial health. And that allows us to be a healthy presence in the entire diocese.
absolutely.
And not only to be an example, but I don't know if folks know, but the church gives sort of a tithe to the Diocese of Washington every year. And we're able to be kind of a lead gift amongst the Diocese of Washington because of our great financial health.
Well, and I do sit on the investment committee, so I actually know how the money's also invested, and it's being invested very prudently and wisely and continues to grow. But it's important that we keep adding to it because the needs grow for the church. And as we all know, as we look around, there's always new things to do with our church and its buildings, as well as new missions that we might feel we want to take on. So the last question here is, how is it different than annual giving? Well, both plan giving and annual giving are important. When you look at our budget, there is a line item for all of our pledges. And I'm excited to hear that we are back over $1 million for this year, which is incredibly important for the success and financial health of our parish. The other line item of income is really is a small income or withdrawal from that endowment each year that supports the other half of our expenses. So these two things go hand in hand, but annual giving, thank you for all of you who do this. This is the giving while you're living part. But we also need the plan giving, which is when you've left the planet, what is your legacy and how can you continue to have a positive impact on St. John's, as well as other causes and charities that might be important to you. All right, so let's keep going. So there's lots of different ways that in particular you can make St. John's part of your legacy. The first is what we call bequests. And these are basically saying in your will or if you have a revocable trust or a family living trust, where you indicate that upon my death, I would like to have a certain amount of money left to St. John's or another charity. Beneficiary designations are another way that you can do that, whether it's on life insurance that you own or an annuity or an IRA or a 401k, you can designate St. John's. And if you're interested in any of these things, but especially this, we can give you the specific language to do that. Also, there's something called transfer on death account. So maybe the account is in your name, but at your death, you would like the money or part of the money to go to some place like St. John's. You can indicate that as well. And the last obvious place is if you happen to have what's called a donor advised fund. It's sort of like a mini foundation. And that's another place where, again, upon your death, you could designate that whatever is left in that fund could go to St. John's as well. So those are, and I'm going in order of simple to more complicated. So as we get to the last two, charitable trusts and charitable gift annuities, these normally require the help of an estate planning attorney. Certainly developing a will or a trust document also generally requires working with an estate planning attorney, but there are some online resources. But when we get to charitable trusts and charitable gift annuities, it's best to work with your accountant, your estate planning attorney, your financial planner to figure out how this is going to work. What's neat about the last two bullets is that in both cases, you have the ability during your lifetime to give money away, but to get an income from those monies you've given away, but then have the remainder of whatever's left from that gift go on to St. John's or to another charity, and you get a tax deduction. So it's a little more complicated, but for people who would like to do something now, make a commitment now, but also still get some benefit from those assets while committing them out to St. John's or another charity, you can do that too.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a wonderful opportunity. And we should hasten to point out right now that none of these options that you're describing, and in fact, this whole exercise and journey of plan giving has nothing to do with how much wealth we have. We don't have to be fantastically rich to engage in this process and benefit from this process, right?
Absolutely. I mean, because many of us, you don't have a complicated estate, you don't have huge amounts of resources, but even just putting St. John's as the beneficiary, or maybe the second beneficiary on a retirement plan, an IRA account, a life insurance policy, on a particular bank account where you can make it, it's actually called payable on death if it's a bank account versus transfer on death if it's an investment account. Anybody can do that. Anybody can make those plans. And I know often folks think, oh, it's only for the wealthy, and that really isn't true. Just as annual giving, our stewardship campaign, anyone can participate, and we welcome any level of commitment and generosity. All right, let's keep going. All right, so I thought it would be important to think about, how do we discern our desire to create a legacy? Often we're so caught up in the day-to-day, it's hard to think ahead to, really what do we want our legacy to look like? So the first thing is, of course, do you have any heirs? Because most of us are going to want to provide in some part to our heirs, whether they're children or parents or siblings or nieces and nephews or whatever it might be. And thinking through what legacy do you want to leave them is really maybe the first place that you're going to want to start. And then I think this is the deeper question. Would you like to have a lasting impact that extends beyond your own life? That's what legacy is really about. And that's what we're here to talk about today. And then, so that's really from the heart and from your spirit, having that lasting impact that lives on beyond you. The next question is, you might have some estate or income tax planning considerations that are important to you. Perhaps you have done quite well with your financial resources. And we'll talk about this in a minute as far as how things are changing around estate tax laws potentially, and maybe income tax laws as well. And so you may be concerned about how much is left to the government in terms of estate taxes, and you may want to do some planning to alleviate some of that. And then I think the last question, again, this is a harder spiritual question really, is how has St. John supported you over the years? And how might you support future parishioners and the mission of the church through your giving, like Elsie Quinby, and then some of the other people, so many of the other people along the way who have been generous in leaving a part of their legacy to St. John's.
When did you, Lisa, when did the kind of inspiration or that kind of desire to leave something for the future, when did you realize this was a really crucial thing for folks to think about? When did that spring up in your own life?
I think pretty early for me. I've updated my estate planning documents a number of times, probably 4 or 5 times as an adult. And actually I'm sitting here with my most recent version from last year. And so, it's one of those, it's a question that comes up. And for me, it hit me that, yes, I do want to leave some sort of legacy. I do want to make sure that even when I'm gone, it's not so much for me about being remembered, like having my name on a building kind of thing, but there's just some peace of mind, and something that feels so good to know that, not just during my lifetime through the annual giving, but at the end that, I remembered not only St. John's, but the university I went to, Jim's college, several different organizations. So pretty early on, as the first time I was asked those questions, well, do you want to leave anything to an organization? And it was obvious to me, well, yes, St. John's is absolutely one of those organizations that I feel really grateful to have been connected to, that has supported my family in many ways over the years. Obviously, all of my boys have been baptized here, and we've had some funerals of, as we've lost family members. So it's been a huge part of our life, and I can't imagine not making it part of my plan giving. All right, let's keep going. Well, and actually, so this is the more technical part, and this is really the changing tax policy landscape, and why it's important, if you haven't updated your estate planning in a while, even if you don't have significant wealth, things have changed. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but let me just start with a review of where we stand right now. So currently, the federal estate tax exemption, the amount of money that you can leave free and clear to your family, is a huge number. It's going to sound like a huge number.
Yeah.
$11.7 million per person. And that's a lot. Wow. But let me note for DC and Maryland residents that it's only 4 million and 5 million respectively. So you might be able to pass on a legacy of over $11 million to your heirs without federal estate taxes. But if you live in DC or Maryland and have done quite well for yourself, your family may have to pay DC or Maryland estate taxes. Now, if you're lucky enough to live in Virginia like I do, It's following basically the federal numbers. But all of that is about to change. And by the way, the DC number has been lowered. The mayor lowered that this year. So you may have been thinking it's been higher. It is actually lower now. Now, in 2025, that $11.7 million number goes away and we revert back to 5.48 plus inflation. So it'll probably be a number more like 6 million. And I know all these numbers are pretty big, but we're thinking about, but here's where it gets interesting. And here's where more of us are going to need to rethink our estate planning. There is proposed federal estate tax exemption. They're proposing to lower it from that 11.7 million to 5 million per person. And there are even proposals to take it down to 3.5 million.
Wow.
And once and here's what you got to remember is included in your estate. So it's all of the obvious things like your investments. It's also your real estate. And it is life insurance that you own outright. And so you have to add all those things up because you may be thinking, well, I don't have that much in investments, but what about, we all know that real estate values are going up. Maybe you have a life insurance policy. And we all don't know when our last day on the planet is going to be. And so you have to plan with sort of the high side in mind, as opposed to, I'll have spent all the money and it won't be like that later. So this is really important. The other thing is that if you haven't updated your estate planning in, say, probably about 8 to 10 years, there's also been a lot of changes as far as HIPAA, the Health Privacy Act type of information, and many of your documents may not be current for the appropriate language. So it isn't just about all these issues, it's also about some of the other rules that have changed. So
the difference between the 11.7 and the 5.4 is significant.
Or 3.5, which is a possibility. I think we probably won't go that low, but I think there's a lot of people who believe we could go down to 5 million.
Wow.
Yeah. So we really, if you do have an issue, it's time to think about it. So what is an estate plan? Because for some of you, you're younger, you're just getting started. And I want to talk a little bit about why you would do this, because you don't have to be married, very established, into your 50s, 60s, 70s to have an estate plan. The basic estate plan is going to be start with a will. Which is where you indicate in general how you would like to have monies distributed, who will be in charge of your estate, who will settle your affairs. A financial power of attorney. So God forbid something happens to you and you are incapacitated and can't make your own financial decisions. Your financial power of attorney can do that for you. And then, and these words have changed over the years, but advanced medical directive, often the healthcare power of attorney is included in that. We also sometimes use the term living will. And so this is basically everything around potential medical decisions and medical care for you, end of life decisions. Do you want to be on life support? Do you not? Do you want your organs donated? Do you want to be cremated? All kinds of different things like that. And then if somebody had to make decisions about while you're living because you were incapacitated, that healthcare power of attorney is important. So that's the basic package.
Lisa, I've got to think.
Yes.
This past year, people in your profession have probably been hearing from a lot of folks who either hadn't updated, hadn't even thought about this, and they've been faced with the life and death that's COVID, right?
Oh, absolutely. I can tell you that all of the estate planning attorneys that we work with have been busy nonstop throughout the COVID crisis. So yes, I think for a lot of people, it has really brought to the forefront, I need to have my affairs in order, no matter what stage I'm at.
Yeah.
So, as we become more complex as far as our affairs, you would have all the same basic documents, but then you might have some things like a revocable trust. And revocable means it can be changed. So you can change who the trustees are. Normally, you are the first trustee. You can change who the beneficiaries are during your lifetime. And then once you have left the planet, it becomes irrevocable and cannot be changed. And often we see more and more of this. I especially like to see clients who are single with resources, consider having a revocable trust. If you have properties, multiple properties in different states, often we recommend having a revocable trust. And then what has died off because of the estate exemptions going up so high, but is coming back now because estate exemptions may be going down, is what's called a life insurance trust. And basically, you might have some life insurance on yourself, but it's owned by a trust. And because it's owned by a trust, it's not included in your estate. And thus it can become a resource to pay estate taxes. And like I said, it went away as a estate planning technique for a long time, at least for, really, especially in the last 10 years or so. But my estate planning attorney friends predict that life insurance trusts are going to come back into vogue because people are going to need to have insurance outside of their estate to potentially pay the taxes that may exist.
Wow.
So things are getting a little bit more complicated potentially. Now, who should have estate planning documents? There's lots of reasons. One is you've gotten married and you want to make sure that your spouse is protected. If you own a house, maybe you're single and you've bought a house, making sure that it's clear who you want to get that house, how you want it disposed of, especially if you don't want it disposed of and you want to leave it to someone, that's an even more important reason. If you have children, and we both have children, now they are over 18, but when they were under 18, it's very important to name two things. One is the guardian for your children. Who would take care of your children if, God forbid, you and your spouse were not around? And then number two is who will manage any monies, maybe life insurance, investment monies, and be the trustee for a trust for your children. And one of the things that I've seen happen, Carolyn, is that often people can't get around to doing this because the spouses can't agree on who should take care of the children. That seems to be right.
Yep.
And so they do nothing. But if you do nothing, that can be really tricky. Your children someone may have to go to court on their behalf. It can be very messy, especially if you have family members who would not necessarily agree on who should take care of the children. So this is when you have children, for no other reason, you need to get some basic documents in order. Now, if you have investment assets, you may or may not need to have a will because in some cases you can, if it's retirement accounts, you can control through beneficiary designations who gets the money. But if it's a regular non-retirement account, yeah, you need a will because otherwise it's not clear who the monies should go to. And like I said, if you own property in multiple states, if you have any special needs children or special needs folks in your family, there's planning that needs to be done if you expect to owe estate taxes, like we were talking about on the last slide. And if you want to control how your assets are distributed, so you want them to go to your family members, but you want them to go to them in certain percentages, and maybe you want to allow some monies to go to places like St. John's and other causes and organizations you care about, you need to actually do some planning. Once you've left the planet, not everybody's going to know what you wanted to do.
No, and not everyone, right. And not everyone would even act in a way, again, you're gone, it doesn't matter, but in a way, your legacy matters.
It does.
And you want people to know how you want things to go because not everyone, like you said, know that, and they may not act in a way you would have thought was appropriate or even worthy.
Exactly. Yeah. So just taking the guesswork out of it and being intentional is what this is about.
All right, I'm reminded that this is making me think that I think another reason people avoid this topic, and particularly things like who's going to take care of the children, because there's fear associated with that. It's a sorrowful reality to have to consider. I'm also, though, becoming more and more aware of how empowering what you're sharing is for folks. Granted, sure, sometimes it's a sobering conversation to have, but I just imagine I remember how empowering it was for me to go through this exercise of getting a trust, getting a will made, and the peace of mind it gave me afterward.
thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things, Carolyn, sometimes we see is that people don't want to do the planning because they're afraid. I've literally heard people say this, that I'm, signing my death warrant. And that's just not true. And we always want to plan when it's not a crisis. If we're all coming out of this crisis now. This is such a great opportunity to say, wow, life is really precious. I do have some thoughts about legacy and what's important to me, and it's time to get that memorialized. And to think ahead, as opposed to wait until it's a crisis and have to be scurrying around, maybe not making the best decisions.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. So you alluded to it. Many people have not heard of, at least in a while, the St. John's 1816 Society. So why is it 1816? Basically, that's the founding of our church, give or take. It depends on where you count from, right? And the idea was to recognize, as it says, a group of forward-looking, charitably inclined parishioners. And so a number of years back, we launched the 1816 Society. And for those of you who've been around for a while, in past bulletins, when we used to be able to gather in the church and have paper bulletins, we would periodically put that list out. Now, some people chose not to have their name specifically listed. It just said anonymous. But the church had all of the names, but we would recognize people who had decided to intentionally recognize St. John some way, shape, or form in their estate planning and beneficiary designations. So if you've done that, please let us know. We are keeping a master list of this. If you don't want your name to be published, just let us know and we can respect that. The other thing is, let us know. We don't need to have you show proof of what you've done, but we'd like to know in what way you have remembered St. John's. Is it through your estate planning documents? Is it through beneficiary designations? That's just helpful for us to understand for the future. And the other piece I should say is, make sure that your executor or executrix, if it's a female, and family understand your wishes, so that there's no surprise when we go to settle the estate. Then, in fact, the St. John's was to be part of that. You were recognized as being part of the 1816 Society. And we welcome and look forward to welcoming new members to that group, because it's what is going to sustain our church into the next century and beyond, is people doing that.
About how many folks are part of the 1816 Society right now?
Oh boy, now you've caught me off guard. I want to say it's over maybe 45 people are.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And names that you would know. And some names you wouldn't know as well are included. And then, of course, there are some people who've decided that they would prefer to be remain anonymous, and we respect that as well. All right, so Carolyn, why don't you see if there's any questions, and maybe you've got some questions.
I will, and it may be that we're going to be joined by Reverend Fisher.
Good.
Got a little text from him saying that he was going to appear too, so he may have some things he wants to add. Yeah, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A or the chat, and Lisa would be happy to answer them. We'll see if anyone does.
And if not, I've got some questions too that I can ask myself, or you can ask me.
Yes. Well, why don't you ask one of those? Oh, here's one.
Okay.
Oh, this is from Toby. Does a person have to, oh, this is good, Toby. Does a person have to go to a lawyer to do this stuff or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as it turns out, technology has evolved quite a bit. There are a couple of online resources that you can go to. I don't recommend online resources if you have a more complicated situation. If you need to set up a trust, probably best to talk with an estate planning attorney. If you have a special needs child, don't do that online. But if you're just trying to get a basic will, powers of attorney, advanced medical directive, that's fine. And I know a couple of them. If you're interested, you can email me, and if we need be, we can put that in the chat box and people can email me and I'll get you those resources. And if you need estate planning attorney referrals, let me know what state you're in. Certainly in the DMV area, I have a variety of resources. So, I think if your situation is simple, if you're 25 years old or 30 years old and you've just bought your first property, you can probably do your documents online. Just remember though, if you move states, if you move to a different state, make sure that you have someone look at your estate planning documents, because especially on medical powers of attorney and financial powers of attorney, the language can be different between states.
I was really fascinated to hear you say that you have updated your financial planning documents multiple times in the past years. You're a financial professional. Pretend like you're not for a minute. What was your prompt to do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the first was getting married, as I've mentioned. The next one was when our oldest son, John, was born. Then again, when our twins were born, Robert and David. And then I knew at that point, because that was in 2001, then some of the estate tax laws had changed a little bit. So that seemed like a good time to update things. And now the reason we've updated them again, and this is another reason for many of you to update it, is if you've got estate planning documents that talk about your children as minors under 18, it's time to reflect on how well are they doing with finances? How well are they doing in their lives? What provisions would you change now as they have become young adults? And so we definitely made some changes to include children in a different way. And then I imagine that I will, if you lose a spouse, that will be the next time. And I hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. And then, so I imagine that I will, Carolyn, continue over the years because of milestones in my family and my life as grandchildren show up, perhaps. And then even end of life. Sometimes there are reasons at end of life to make some quick estate planning changes. So it's a journey. It's not a one and done thing. It is planning that needs to continue throughout your life.
Best circumstances, ideal. When should folks start this journey?
So I think
job as soon as you're earning income?
Well, as I said on that one slide, I think, if you buy a property, you're starting to build up some investment assets that are not in your 401k or IRA. Those are, I think, the beginning points. And certainly when you perhaps get married, or if you've gone into a serious relationship where you would want to provide for that person, maybe you're not going to get married for whatever reason. Those are all sort of the starting points. So that could be when you're 25, it could be when you're 30. It'll be different for each person, but those are, important life milestones that I think warrant some sort of planning effort.
Toby has a second question. Is there anything special someone needs to put in a plan language-wise? Or can you just say, I'd like to leave X amount of dollars to St. John's?
Right. And so one of the questions first is, do you put it in dollar terms or percentages of your estate? And everyone will have a different view about that. If you make it a dollar amount and you did that 25 years ago, that dollar amount is not going to be as significant as it was when you originally wrote your documents. So you want to think about, do I do it in percentage terms or dollar terms? That's the first thing. And then second of all, yes, there is actually, if you contact the church or contact me, there is some specific language. It's a little more complete as far as, putting St. John's. And I think we have some other, like a tax ID number, and then also our full address, that kind of information. There is some language ideally that you want to have in there just to make it, and especially because there are multiple St. John's churches in the area. So you want to make sure you say Lafayette Square so it doesn't go to a different St. John's.
St. John's Georgetown. We love them, but we wanted to come to, and there's St. John's Norwood in Bethesda.
Exactly. Looks like Anne's got a question.
Yeah, Anne has a question. Anne Stewart. She asks, I'm thinking of working through a community foundation to allocate my funds after I die. This would include St. John's, which I've already listed as a beneficiary. Any comments?
Yeah, and that is a great tool, a community foundation, a donor advised fund through a foundation. There's, multiple similar ways that you can go at this. What I like about doing this, and even naming your community foundation fund or your donor advised fund as a beneficiary, is it's more flexible. I actually talked to one of my elderly clients last week about this, because I think it's a great way you can have multiple beneficiaries. It makes it really clear what your priorities are, and that's always easier for your family members. The other thing, the question that nobody's asked yet, but I know is probably question, is what if I change my mind? For whatever reason, I don't want to include St. John's, or I do want to include St. John's now. Often what Anne is talking about, or also through what is called a donor advised fund, naming the charities of your choice, that's easy to change. Whereas when you name them in your trust or your will, you've got to go and update your estate planning documents. So beneficiary designations and naming, basically this is naming a beneficiary for Anne's fund through a community foundation that she works with, is a really flexible and great way to be able to easily update your preferences for your legacy giving going forward.
And again, what I'm hearing you describe are options, and options are empowering because it gives us agency, it gives us choice, and it allows us to have, form a legacy that is meaningful for us. It's
Absolutely.
wonderful. I'm just going to stop our share so we appear a little larger on the screen. Lisa, I wanted to ask you, the St. John's Investment Fund, the committee that you serve on, is this really quite powerful, low-key energy, this presence that runs year after year after year, kind of behind the scenes. What are a couple of things that you'd like people to know about the work your committee does, and just how almost essential, but certainly important, investments for a nonprofit organization are?
So absolutely essential, and as I've said before, it's a critical part of having that resource and having that grow, and having a line item of income that we can draw to support the budget each year of St. John's workings is incredibly important. The things that we think about are, we're thinking ahead to, how can we protect the portfolio in times where things get a little rocky in the stock market, and yet we want to take a very long view of these monies, because they have been with us a long time, and our goal is to steward them well into the future, to the next century. And so being very thoughtful about how the money is invested, how well it's balanced, making sure that the people that we have managing the money are very competent, which they are. Brown Advisory Group is very competent. They've been managing our money now, I think, for about 11 years. As I said, we just had a meeting on Friday to talk about and just thinking about exactly how is the money invested. And that's actually a discernment we're in right now, is thinking about how is our money invested specifically, and does that align with St. John's values?
I love that you just used the word discernment, because I really feel like this process, and I'm calling it this journey that we embark on, that is our financial identity, our financial selves, but it also is an opportunity, it's probably a necessity for discernment. And part of that, isn't it, is discerning how this fits in with our identity as Christians who are part of a faith community, right?
Yes. I mean, when we think about time, talent, and treasure, I mean, this is, one of those three areas that we can contribute. Sometimes it's time and things that we volunteered, and sometimes it's our professional talents that we bring to support St. John's and the community. And other times it is our treasure, and being intentional about that, I think, is really important.
I agree. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Lisa, thank you so much. I'm going to say on behalf of everyone who's participating, how much I appreciate the blessing that you provide our congregation. I'm so happy that you're part of our parish. I really look forward to getting back into the sanctuary. I am contemplating maybe changing where I sit just because it seems like it's an opportunity for a reset, but I may not. So I'll say I'm going to look forward to seeing us in our regular seats and passing the peace again. But to those of you who joined us today, thank you so much. This presentation will be recorded. So if you feel like you want to go back and listen again to things that Lisa presented, that opportunity will be available.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And if you got time now to hustle off to the 11 o'clock service if you want to online.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Carolyn.